pretty much genes what load the gun and your lifestyle what pulls the trigger.
And you can have Thor's freaking genetics, okay? Let's say you're a god from another planet, and you've got that DNA. If you smoke and you don't eat well and you don't exercise, you don't do this, it doesn't make a damn bit of difference.
Because your environment is so much more powerful than your genes will ever be.
97% of the genetics in your body lie in the gut.
It was just so mind-blowing to see that for some of the top risk factors that are causing these non-communicable diseases that are cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, a high mortality risk, 23 of those top risk factors are modifiable. And we're alive.
We're talking about getting in people's genes is what we're talking about.
Yes, down into your genetic level is where we're going to go down into and share some things that I used to believe in. And now I wouldn't say I don't, but I just take it with a huge grain of salt.
Yeah, you got to be careful. And hopefully by the end of the episode, we'll have worked our way through this. But it's something that I believe there's real value in, but I believe it's still very early stage. And you have to be careful about that.
Yes, and we wanted to bring this topic to our audience's attention because it's been making headlines recently that 23andMe, one of the largest DNA testing companies in the country that used to be valued at $6 billion, has filed bankruptcy the end of March.
Mm-hmm.
And they're up for sale. So a lot of people are worried, what is going to happen to my data? And we're talking millions of people, including me. So what are we going to do? What can I do in order to protect my data so it doesn't get sold to the wrong person?
Right. And listen, is that a real fear or not? I think until we know that it's not, you have to believe that it is. And
Yes.
You probably need to be more conservative than not. You know, when you sign up for one of these, whether it's 23andMe or Ancestry or any of them, you almost always click a box that says, we own your genetic data is safe with us. We won't sell it. We won't do all that. But with 23andMe going into bankruptcy, all of a sudden, all that's gone. Okay. All that information, all that legal stuff that you signed early on, this is now a straight up asset of the company, and whoever buys it is going to be able to do with it what they want. So that's the reason that they're warning you to maybe you want to go onto the site. If 23andMe is your provider, you probably want to go in there and delete your data because you don't know who's going to get it.
Yeah, and they do say, I mean, in terms of reading a few different news articles about it, that the company and the CEO claims that, by the way, she's stepping down. But at the same time, they're saying that whoever buys 23andMe will have to continue follow the law in terms of data privacy. So we'll have to see. But I don't think I'm far-fetching if I say that I'm sure there are loopholes where they don't end up having to follow the law and find ways to extract what needs to be extracted to potentially, there's data in there that's about your risk for developing certain diseases or what your lifestyle may be like. Because we're not only talking about genetic data, 23andMe also has a lot of survey data that individuals fill out about their lifestyle. So someone who's working in marketing, that's a gold mine for targeted ads. Like, this person likes certain lifestyles, I'm going to target this type of products to them because they're more likely to purchase.
Or
so there's
let's say a
part.
big national insurance company buys 23andMe. They get access to this data, and they're not going to distribute the data, but if all of a sudden they pull that in and they run correlations between that data set and the cost of illness that they have in their data sets, okay, that would be a smart thing to do. Well, the next step for that insurance company could be, I think I'm going to change the rates of this person with this particular genetic profile versus this other person. And all of a sudden, the what's the word I'm looking for? The ambiguity, the basicness of that relationship you had with that company begins to change. And that's really important. So, and listen, if Blue Cross Blue Shield buys them, you can opt in down the road. Maybe Blue Cross Blue Shield says, hey, we're going to give you a discount if you give us your data, and you trust them, you can load it back up. But until you're sure about that, I'd put it in my pocket and walk away with it for a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. I logged into my 23andMe profile and platform and dashboard and went into settings. I can't remember the exact steps, but what I did,
Uh-huh.
I downloaded my data. However, I'm not deleting until it lands in my inbox, because when I hit download, it wasn't an immediate download. For me, it said that it might take a few days for my download to arrive as an email attachment, and it hasn't. So until it
You
does,
still don't have it.
I don't want to delete it.
You know, that's funny because when we started talking about this episode, I have an account with Ancestry. My wife, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, bought me an Ancestry. It was a Christmas gift. It was pretty cool. You know, we did it. I'll tell you, it nailed my father's side of the family genealogically, just nailed it. Missed my mother's side of the family completely. So I'm still trying to understand that. But, and so that was the first look we took at it, and at the time, Ancestry wasn't really making those next steps. I literally just logged back in not long ago, and I'm like, "Oh, there's some features in here from Ancestry that are a lot like what 23andMe was talking about." And so they got me to pay another 25 bucks for 6 months, and I'm going to explore this a little bit, but I will deduct it from my taxes based on a business expense. But we take a look at this, and well, and then the other side of this is that there's cool services coming up. And I shared with you one of the things I did. One of the people that I follow in this industry religiously that I think she does a wonderful job is Dr. Rhonda Patrick. Dr. Patrick is one of the best consumer communicators of this science that I've seen. I think she's brilliant. I think her website is top notch. Think join you can join Dr. Pat's, Found My Fitness for like $15 a month. Great money. This is great money spent. Okay. I don't want to, but one of the services that she has is you can load your genetic data from Ancestry, from 23andMe into her system, and she runs a genetic analysis that's based on more of like what we're looking for. I'm not looking, listen, I know who my dad's parents are. I knew them. I met them. I used to sit on the front porch with them. So I don't need that, but it's kind of cool to see how that it works and where part of the world did they come from and how did they wind up in the States, yada, yada, yada. But, oh, I just yada, yada this in our podcast. Did you notice that? Uh, I think that's a first. But when you plug this into Dr. Patrick's site and you get the report, first of all, the report was 50 pages. Okay. It was so extensive. I was just like, I mean, it overwhelmed me. So I took it and ran it through ChatGPT and and ChatGPT did a pretty nice job of running an analysis and making it more concise. And you know what? It confirmed a lot of the beliefs I had. Now, let's talk about that for just a second. I'm a professor of exercise science for the last 35 years. Okay. I'm not your average consumer. I'm not Joe Bag of Donuts that goes into and pumps gas at the Arco station or, does donuts for Dunkin' Donuts or things like that. This is something that I'm very up to speed on, behaviors, lifestyle, these kinds of things. It gave me some reflections that were very accurate of my observations I've been making over the last 30 years that I've been really doing personal surveillance of myself. So that confirms the fact to me that, this is good. I'm not ready to say great yet. I think it's good. Listen, we'll talk about this in context as we go. Having the information isn't the worst thing in the world. And if you got to spend $100 to get it, what do I have in this? I think my wife paid $100 for the kit. I think I probably have, I was already making an investment in Dr. Patrick's site, so there was no additional event, but let's assign that to there. So there's $15 a month. That's $180 a year. And then I just paid them $25 for 6 months to get access to their data set more. It's a relatively low investment to have some relatively interesting information that I think is relatively accurate.
Yes, it does have accuracy, and I think it does have value to how you're going to make decisions, whether it's about diet, training, stress management, sleep,
Hmm.
because while genes we now know are not your destiny, it's pretty much genes what load the gun and your lifestyle what pulls the trigger. Because it's that epigenetics, your exposure to all these environmental factors that really determine whether how those genes are going to be expressed. So, as much as there is value in having your DNA data at hand, you know you have a risk for XYZ. But it's not 100% certainty. It's your choices that will determine whether that switch will
Yes.
actually be switched on or will remain turned off.
Yeah, genetics are not your destiny. I mean, your behaviors much more important. I mean, I think you have a paper to link in here from Nature where it's looking at when you look at environmental factors, behavior, genetics are very, very low. And listen, what's crazy about this is that the genetics that are sitting in your shoes right now, okay, only about 3% of those came from your parents. 97% of the genetics in your body lie in the gut, in the microbiome distribution in your gut. There is a huge level of variability there. Now, what's funny about this, Claudia, years ago when I was at Ohio State, we got to the point where we'd bring in freshmen and I would run a physical profiling process on them. I would get their VO2, I would get their strengths in particular areas, we'd get their HRV, we'd get things like that. And I'd develop a physical profile. Now, one of my pet peeves is around things like nutrition and nutritionists. Um, they had a universal dietary recommendation for the wrestling team. Okay. Now, the problem is I've got a 125 pounder who cuts 15 pounds to make weight, and I've got a heavyweight who's eating everything in sight because he's below the 285 limit. Okay. Those are the extremes. Then you got everybody else in between. So a single recommendation does not fit. Period. End of story. Okay. Now, this is where a process like this can really come into play. Let me make one other statement here is that when you're looking at health, nutrition data like this that's in research, in order to get your research study published, you do a randomization of your study participants so you have a general genetic distribution, and then you apply your treatment, you look at the impact of the treatment, and we try to establish what's called a normal curve. And generally the recommendations from the research study come from the average of the normal curve. This is how these people responded to this treatment. At a personal level or at a coaching level or at a medical level, Claudia, you could have been 3 standard deviations to the left of the mean, and I could be 3 standard deviations to the right of the mean. We are completely different people than what that person that's represented by the mean is. And so figuring out who you are through a lot of different profiles, it may be a genetic profile, it may be a physiological profile using wearable technology. This is one of the reasons I love wearable tech. It may be a biological, you get blood work done. I'll tell you a service that I like, and we don't have a stake in this. Tracker. If you go to the website Inside Tracker, they've got a pretty cool product there. You draw blood, they do a ton of work there. They've got a unique data set that represents you. The odds of you being 3 standard deviations in or out is a lot less if you're using their data set. But when you go to your doctor and they do a lab test, they're comparing you to Homer Simpson. Okay, that's the comparable there. Well, neither you or I are Homer Simpson. While I like donuts, I'm not Homer Simpson. And so being able to pull some of these profiles in can really help you make a better decision based on behaviors, things what's going to work for you.
Yes, and just to piggyback off of how this can be used for sports, about, what is it, 8 years ago when I first came across with genetic testing. It was even more in its infancy at the time. I was living in London pursuing my graduate broadcast journalism degree, and I was working on an article for the local paper on genetic testing because I got linked up with one of the Olympic long jumpers who utilized genetic testing in order to optimize his training. Now, at the time, of course, one of the people who I wanted to interview was not only the company that provided the genetic testing, but also a geneticist who's completely unbiased and could tell me whether there's any premise in looking at DNA in order to make decisions, in order to decide what is going to get me to an Olympian. And his response was exactly what has now become such a huge headline, where DNA is not your destiny and genetics are not your destiny. It can provide a clue that you can use or lose, and you ideally used with the right intention, but it is not going to be 100%. This is the path you need to walk on in order to achieve X.
No, and we see this. Listen, you and I could probably do 10 episodes on Olympic preparation, selection, things like that. I love, there's a really good book out there that's called The Talent Code. I've probably talked about it on the podcast before, but Daniel Coyle looking at, okay, what selects for excellence? Well, you know what? I'll tell you what makes a great wrestler is a level of poverty. Okay, that when you have no other choice and listen, you look at the great wrestling countries, Russia and Iran and places like that, okay? They got no other choice. They're in a fight from the beginning, okay? And when you grow up in a relatively well-off community and you go into wrestling practice and you get your ass handed to you in a basket that day, there's a lot of kids that say, "Screw this, I'm not working this hard. I'm going to join Young Republicans and I'm going that way." Whereas some of us didn't have that choice. Some of us, it was just like, environment. There's a lot of things that went into putting us into that sport. You then fall in love with it and go. But yeah, this is the handful that goes with this a lot of times, is that it's not genetics that make the determination. It is environment, and you can modify environment. That's the beauty.
Yeah, and it was very interesting, and when it comes to 23andMe, how it does provide you some details on genes that you can use to make decisions for example, training. Like it told me that I had the type of genes for muscle that is comparable to what elite athletes have. So that fast twitch
Yeah, I
genes
think that's fair.
and that sort of confirmed something that I felt was already true to me, which I perform a lot better at high intensity interval training or an hour workout where I can push all out or just really lift heavy load as opposed to training for a marathon. It's just what I feel my body is more primed to do, and it's easier for me to achieve. However, that doesn't mean if I don't train a certain way, I can't run a marathon. So that's another thing that I think, hold a second, where I think sometimes people can fall into the wrong mindset of my genes are telling me this, so there's no way I can do that. And that's not true, because your environment and your behavior can change things.
Yeah, absolutely. The first time I met you, I remember we were at this little expo down in Orange County, and we were introduced. So phenotypically, when I look at you, it was my athlete bell was going off. This is obviously an athlete. Then you speak and I hear your accent. I'm like, oh, she's European too. I'm like, this is a long jumper. This is a decathlete. And it took a little bit more of a conversation to find out that your dance is your physical activity. Absolutely, you're phenotypically you scream athlete. And you know what? Athletes don't have to have scoreboards. You can be a dancer, you can be a firefighter, you can be a worker. I mean, those are all very physical things, but absolutely yes. And if you came to me and said, "Hey, I want to do this particular activity," I have a lot of friends who have come to me from competing in college athletics or associates, and they say, "Okay, what do I do to stay active?" Listen, CrossFit was a nice development for that population. CrossFit's a horrible decision for a lot of people. Okay. But for that athletic population, it's really good. Firefighting. When I have a wrestler come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about going into protective services. And I'm like, firefighting, firefighting, firefighting. Do not do police work. Only 5% of police work has ever been shown to be associated with physical fitness. Even though we show them running all over TV when you know we're in a crime scene and whatever, firefighters train like athletes on a regular basis and they're paid to do it. So again, as you're making that lifestyle move, that phenotype is so much on lifestyle and genetics. Listen, genetics may help us explain what are problems when something's not working out. I don't think we're quite there yet, frankly. I think a good blood work with hormones tells me more about what's going on. I think HRV tells me more. When I've got someone who's struggling with injury, I've usually got someone who's got an overtraining problem. I'll usually go to hormones after that and back up from there. I do believe the genetics are coming. I believe they are going to become a good tool, but I don't think they're there yet.
Yes, and the study that you mentioned earlier that was published in Nature magazine, it was just so mind-blowing to see that for some of the top risk factors that are causing these non-communicable diseases that are cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, high mortality risk, 23 of those top risk factors are modifiable.
Yes, absolutely.
We're talking about smoking, physical activity, even income and housing that is determining your all-cause mortality. And this is something that people might not think about it. And like you mentioned, genetics explain less than 2%, which is really, really low. So I just wanted to kind of help people see that those numbers, how the study really showed smoking was linked to 21 diseases, socioeconomic status to 19 diseases, physical activity and the like thereof to 17 diseases. And there's also another interesting thing where that I also read a study recently, how childhood exposure to
Smoke.
stress, to smoking, to all of those different risk factors impact the child later on in life and potentially next generations. There was a study that was showing very early stage where it was saying how when young boys are exposed to trauma and high stress, they can see changes in their epigenetics in their sperm, which could eventually impact future generations. And I
Absolutely.
was like, holy cow.
Yes. Well, I was having this
If I had known
conversation.
that.
I was having this conversation with a very good friend of mine the other day, who had a really tough childhood setup, sexual abuse in the family, things like that. We're now 2 generations past that. So his sister had 2 children. His sister passed away, and he is raising the kids. He's adopted them and raising the kids. Well, we know there was trauma with his sister. So we know that was passed on. And he's dealing with situations raising these kids where, clean bill of health, new situation, bring them in. No, trauma is still there. It is informing the epigenetic process, and you have to be aware of this. And then one of the things that just cracks me up, Claudia, I guess it doesn't crack me up, but I hear all this debate going on right now with Make America Healthy Again and all this stuff. And I was having this discussion with my brother the other day, and he's saying, I go to the grocery store and people are leaving the store with all this crappy food in their cart, and I'm the only one leaving with single item food. And I said, 11, no, 30 million people in this country still smoke. It's more than that. It's almost 40 million still smoke. They still, and while I've never, both of my parents smoked. My dad was 3 packs a day until he had a major coronary. Luckily, he got through that and lived another 27 years after that and didn't smoke any more than that. My mom also smoked. I mean, my dad grew up in the mountains of North Carolina. They had tobacco sheds. It was a God-given responsibility to smoke. I mean, they lived close to Winston-Salem. Okay. I mean, it was part of the lifestyle. But it took him having a major coronary and frankly talk to God that day to come back, and then when you watch the tar hack out of your lungs when you're in an intensive care unit, that really helps tell the story. It's never been a problem for me. And I remember, you talk about being around it. I remember my brother and I were roommates at Ohio State. My older brother and I were roommates, and neither of us smoked. We were both wrestling, it was part of what we did. I walked into my room one day and I'm like, my dad's been here. I could smell it. I could smell the smoke. So if you if I could smell it walking into my dorm room, what was the impact of all that smoke in our household? Yes, it makes all the sense in the world. I'm a huge fan of nicotine. I'm not pushing back on nicotine. I am not a fan of smoking. I work in cannabis. I do not suggest smoking cannabis or vaping it either. There's other ways to consume it that are very valuable. But but yeah, when you're looking at lifestyle, these behaviors are really, really important. And we've got to look at big picture kind of stuff. Again, if we get, I've always said, don't ban tobacco, ban processed cigarettes. If you want to smoke a cigarette, you have to buy the tobacco, you have to buy the rolling paper, you have to roll the cigarette, then you can smoke it. I think that would cut smoking by like 90%. And then
This
continue to
is too much
tax.
work.
It's too much work. People wouldn't do it. But then tax the daylights out of it too. If you want to get rid of it, that's how you do it. But that's for another day.
Yeah, I know my parents smoked. My dad quit for 30 years. The majority of my childhood and adulthood, he didn't smoke, and then he recently picked it back up. And I'm not an advocate. I really wish he wouldn't, but it's a hard habit to kick to the curb for him.
Well, there's good too. Listen, we could do another episode on this, but there's with nicotine stimulants. Listen, I use nicotine strategically. When I'm getting ready to do a big talk and I want to light up a little bit, meaning I want to raise my awareness, I use nicotine gum. Now, since I don't smoke, since I don't regularly use, the lowest dose of nicotine gum works for me. If I put one of those Zyn things in my mouth, it's like I've put chewing tobacco in my mouth. It's awful. It just wrecks me. But I do use it strategically, and it can be a good molecule. It's all the other shit that comes with smoking and tobacco that's the problem.
Yeah, there are some studies that I've seen that actually link nicotine at a low dose, like when I'm talking like pure nicotine, like the nicotine gums and all those things with increased cognitive function and some
Absolutely.
positive impact.
Yep.
So yeah.
Listen, people don't do it because it doesn't make them feel good. No one does things that doesn't make them feel good. So it absolutely gets that.
And then there was one thing that I wrote down while you were talking that I wanted to mention when we were relating to the fact that things are passing down generation after generation, especially when it comes to trauma or stress. I remember Dr. Zach Bush talks about that all the time, how certain exposures literally track down multi-generation. I know he talks a lot about the gut microbiome and he talks a lot about exposure to glyphosate. If my grandparents or great grandparents were exposed to it and their gut microbiome and their genes have been altered because of exposure to that toxin, I could still be living the negative impact of that exposure and could weaken my immune system and my gut health because they were exposed. So it's crazy how the genes you have is not necessarily those. It's not because they are the genes that your parents or your grandparents had that gave you the blue eyes, but it's how their genes were expressed and what exposure their genes had to withstand and how that passed down onto you. And now you have to build the resilience to sometimes fix whatever bad exposure they had.
And listen, it works both ways. Okay. So when you engage in the possible be in the positive behavior, let me say that again so that we can clip it appropriately. When you engage in the positive behavior, it's going to modify your epigenetic profile, which you then not only pass that epigenetic profile on to your kids, but you pass the behaviors on too. This is what's so important, is that when your children grow up in a house and see you engaging in positive behaviors, it's not just changing the software, it's changing the hardware as well. And this is what's really important on this.
Well said.
There, yeah, we'll clip that.
Okay, I
That's
want to
definitely
pivot
getting
a
clipped for a short, isn't it?
that was a good clip. Yes. I want to pivot a little bit to giving our audience some guidance, some 1% shifts that they can do to make sure that whatever they're doing is giving their best epigenetic outcome possible to reach that 90% healthy state. If somebody has not taken a DNA test, should they? And if they have, what else can they do to really get a larger picture, a more precise picture of their baseline or their health and potential health outcomes?
Okay, there's probably 2 or 3 steps here. I'm gonna start with the first that I consider is that if you have the personal goal of improving your life, your lifestyle, the lifestyle of the people around you, it starts with monitoring what you're doing. And we live in an amazing time right now, Claudia. I'll tell you what, I'm having conversations every week with people about the role of a wearable technology, the kind of data that that's creating, and how you can utilize this. I went back into, I've had an Aura ring since Gen 1 now, and I also work with a thing called Heads Up Health. They are a platform that aggregates a lot of wearable technology with the goal of helping medical providers integrate this into their practice. And I was in my Heads Up Health profile, and I look back and I've got HRV data that goes back to 2017, which not only has HRV data, but there's also activity data in there. There's some other things that go with it that's very interesting. And again, I realize I'm a freak. I don't want to minimize this at all, but I was working for Polar 10 years behind that. And I believe I can probably put together a file of every heartbeat practically I've beat while doing a workout. I've been wearing a heart rate monitor that long. It gives me a record to go back and look at. Okay, what was I doing here? What was good? What was bad? I can see peaks. I can do an analysis. I can say, okay, this is what I need to pay attention to. First step, monitoring. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. Is not Peter Thiel. I'll think about the author of that right here in a bit. But if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So I love monitoring. That's the reason I think the two things that if you're going to do this, get a heart rate monitor. Okay, number one, get a heart rate monitor. They're relatively inexpensive. Everyone has a smartphone in their pocket. You can buy what's called a Polar H10 transmitter for $80. Okay, and the software is free, and it can be one of the most valuable tools you have. I don't know why this isn't more popular by now, but we've obviously failed. We haven't figured out what the connection is. Start there. Number two, start to measure HRV. You can do this with your smartphone for free. There's really good apps that if you want to start to experiment with this, you can use the camera on your smartphone to measure your HRV. I know several companies that are doing this that this gives you a way to start to look at this kind of information. That's a monitor. What you're going to quickly deal with is you're going to get tired of using the phone and you're going to want to move up to a better technology. That's when I go to something like Aura Ring. Aura Ring measures my HRV and activity and things like that. And it's very, very, I don't even have to think about it. I wear a ring, I don't think about it, and it's great data. It's great data to interpret and see what we do. So monitoring, number one. Number two, it's not a bad idea to get a comprehensive profile. This is why I like Inside Tracker. You do blood work, it does DNA work, it does multiple biomarkers that could be really informative. Okay, could be really informative. And I think it could tell you a lot. Males, premenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal females. Oh my God, get your hormones right. Life changes. Okay. And you get back to that lifestyle that you want. DNA is not going to tell you much about menopause, but your hormones will. So I think that's always a good move. Um, then you come up, those are kind of bigger rocks in the jar kind of stuff. Then you can start to come up with microbiome. I'll tell you, I'm not a huge microbiome recommender yet. I see it, I see the value. I've just not seen it commercialized to the place that I'm like, okay, I'm going to jump on board with that. I'm just not there yet. Maybe it's there. I don't understand it. I readily admit that could be the fact. I just don't see it yet. But start monitoring. Everyone benefits from moving more. Everyone benefits from getting nutrient dense food in their mouth. Everyone benefits from improving your sleep environment. Everyone benefits from getting light on your skin correctly. These are easy lifestyle things. Put monitoring on top of that, then start to layer in the things. Like I said, if I were going for a DNA test right now, I would go inside tracker before I went anywhere. We got a new dog 2 years ago. We got him from the pound up in Portland, Oregon. He's a cute dog. You can tell he's a mongrel of some kind. We're pretty sure he's Saint Bernard and Staffordshire Terrier. I think there's some boxer there. I'm more interested in getting him a DNA test than I am getting me a DNA test, because but I'm not willing to put $100 on it yet.
I'm sure that there comes to a point where you can do that,
Oh, it's
or
out there.
maybe they already are.
I'm
Yeah.
still
Okay.
right now. I'm working too hard for my $100 to put it on my dog. I mean, I'm not. It's not going to change me, but it helps me answer the question. Oh, what is that? I'm like, well, we think he's Saint Bernard Staffordshire because that expresses itself very highly. But I think there's some boxer there too. But like I said, before I go, I'm going DNA test for my dog before I go DNA test for me.
That is good to know. And I think our listeners may appreciate it who have been kind of tickling the idea of maybe getting a DNA test. And I agree with you that having a blood panel and hormone tests done every 6 months is a lot more valuable to understanding what your health status is at the moment and what you're doing is either working or not working.
Hmm.
And I am on a very similar page with you on that microbiome test, very much at early stage, and we just don't have enough statistical data in order to draw conclusions at a level that could fit each individual personally. There is some to it, but I think we need some more data on that.
I think within the next decade, I do think this is moving. I think it's moving very fast. I think within
Yeah.
the next decade, I may have be in a situation where I have athletes coming in. My challenge when I'm consulting with a person or an athlete or anybody is, this person walks into my life, walks into my room, and I've never known them before. I don't know anything about them. And I've got to figure out on all these particular parameters, where are they on the curve? Are they in the middle? Are they on the end? Where are they at? So we make lots of observations, and I have a belief that we're not all the same. We treat everyone should be treated differently because we have different genetic and historical profiles. And I do think within the next decade, someone's going to come in. I'm going to do a blood test. I'm going to get a urine sample. I'm going to get a stool sample. I'm probably going to do a genetic test. I'm going to do physiological testing, looking at HR, HRV, VO2, things like this, lactate. And I'm going to have a very, very accurate profile. I think these things are coming slowly. I don't think we're there yet. But in another decade, I do believe we will be.
Yeah, I think some functional medicine doctors and some NDs may be looking at some of these and probably are, but your primary care physician aren't going to be reaching for these tests in order to give you a diagnosis. Unfortunately, we're not there, and I would hope that we are heading that direction. But
Now,
at the end
but
of the day,
let me jump on that real
go
quick,
for it.
Claudia. I'll tell you where it
Yeah.
is happening. If you unfortunately are diagnosed with cancer, okay, genetic testing is driving cancer treatment. Okay, they are doing an outstanding job with that now. But remember, this is when we talked about are we 0 to -10 or are we 0 to 10? When you're dealing with cancer, we're at the minus level of this. We are diseased, we are symptomatic. There are things like that. So all of a sudden, genetic testing is coming in and being very effective. If you're a 3, 4, 5 trying to go to 6, 7, 8, it's a little harder right now. Okay, it's not quite as directed on that. So, but they are using genetics very effectively in medicine. I hope we're doing the things that help keep people away from needing that test.
Yes, that's something that I saw actually when I was reading up on the 23andMe bankruptcy, that some researchers are speculating that perhaps a company that might buy 23andMe and the data along with it is to help develop and research personalized medicine based on genetic data. So that is one aspect that could be a potential good outcome if people do agree to provide their data for research purposes. And I know 23andMe has many times. I used to get emails at least once a month or every other month from 23andMe. Do you opt in your data to be used in genetic research? And you could say yay or nay. So they tend to ask that. But then I think a few years ago, they had a massive data breach with, I think, about almost 7 million people's profiles got breached. So that was one of their big speed bumps that led, I think, eventually to them filing bankruptcy just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
But
genetic data is one piece of the puzzle, in my opinion.
and you can have Thor's freaking genetics, okay? Let's say you're a god from another planet and you've got that DNA. If you know that I go back to the Avengers and when Thor had stopped being Thor and he was drinking beer and he got all fat and I love that. I love that part. That's what happens. If you're Thor and you have Thor data, if you smoke and you don't eat well and you don't exercise, you don't do this, it doesn't make a damn bit of difference. Okay.
Yes, because your environment is so much more powerful than your genes will ever be in terms of how your health outcome will be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I love that you mentioned monitoring because this is something that I noticed recently in terms of, yes, movement, nutrition, sleep, light. Those are all really cool. And I do want to provide these 1% shifts that people can do, like movement, walk, get up every hour and walk for 10 minutes, which is something that I am trying to incorporate into my days, especially having sitting in front of the computer for hours on end. I have to set an alarm for myself to get up and do these micro movements, these movement snacks. And then nutrition, look through your pantry and throw out the things that are highly processed and ultra processed.
Learn to
And
cook.
for sleep, yeah, please,
Learn
yeah,
to
it's
cook.
not that difficult actually. If you have an air fryer, it does everything for you.
Are they the
And
best
with
or what?
sleep, if you just, they are so good. I love our air fryer. It's perfect for so many things. And sleep, go to bed and wake up at the same time. Consistency will make a huge difference in how your body recovers and re-energizes overnight. And I love that you mentioned light is, getting the first light in the morning will set your brain up to let's go mode. So
Mhm.
your body actually start to produce the right hormones and it will help produce melatonin at the end of the day. And there's one more thing that I wanted to add, which I noticed having tracking my data with Aura is
Mhm.
stress management. And for example, couple of weeks ago, I attended this painting class, which was super adorable. My painting skills are absolutely horrendous, but this class made me feel like I can actually do something. And I noticed in my aura data that it went down to restorative in that
Good for you.
stress little threshold. There are different thresholds that they have recovered, restored, engaged, and stressed. And it went down to restored the whole time I was painting. It felt so meditative. And I've always loved coloring as a young child. So very similar. And it made me feel like I need to do more activities like that because, for example, yesterday I was creating content, I was editing video, I was on the computer. I didn't feel particularly stressed, but my aura showed that I had like 4 hours of consistent stress and higher levels of probably beyond engagement that I didn't get enough restorative time. And these types of data monitorings are very insightful for me to make actionable choices or make better choices, I would
Mhm.
rather, that will take me down from that stressed state into that restored state, especially toward the end of the night, so I can get a restorative sleep that my body probably needs. So monitoring is something that everybody should be doing.
The big
Yes.
challenges that we have right now with devices and all the things. We have a TV in our bedroom, but it is rarely on. It I try to be in bed at 10 o'clock every night. That's what I shoot for. And I'm usually there a little bit before that. But you know what? If there's, Final Fours this weekend, okay, there'll be some late games. Rather than sitting up in the living room and watching a game, I will go, and I usually fall asleep I usually miss the whole thing. But but it is not a practice of having that thing on. It's rarely on. While I do have my phone in my bedroom, it's always in a position where I don't see the light from the phone. That's what's really important. It's charging, and I should I not get listen, I've got a daughter. I'm not going to sleep without my phone.
And I just wanted to leave our listeners with one thing that you reminded me as you were talking about how you tend to go to bed around 10 o'clock, but it's the final four. So maybe not every night is going to be exactly how you wanted it. And that's exactly what 90% healthy is about. You want to build that resilience up to 90% healthy. So when life happens, when the final four is on, that 10% buffer will allow your body to adapt and not wreck you and feel like a zombie the next day because you stayed up longer or fell asleep with the TV on,
Yeah.
and really just have that flexibility. And I believe that resilience up to that 90% level gives you the freedom to not feel guilty if your nighttime routine is not perfect every single night, or your morning routine is not perfect, or you forgot a supplement before you ate a donut. So it's just one of those things where I want our listeners to know that 90% healthy doesn't mean you do everything perfect. It means you
No.
do everything so you're 90% healthy, and 10% can be whatever and you can bend, but you won't break. Well, if you have any questions, you as a listener, please reach out to us. Let us know what you're struggling with. If you have any questions about headlines that are popping up and just don't make sense, or if you have personal questions that you might want us, either Don or me, to address, let us know. Comment on our videos and subscribe so you can be notified when a new episode drops,
So
and
much.
follow us along. Thanks,
Have a great
Don.
day,
I'll see you
everybody.
next week. See you.